when I came out. I found my way to Texthelp about 2 to 3 years ago. It was so exciting because all of our tools, really honed in on my heart and soul. My last couple of years teaching was a blended learning, project-based learning environment. And so lots of universal design for learning, very difficult sometimes to teach. And so really what we're hoping to do here is kind of demystifying UDL as this big monster and really trying to hone in on how it can support other areas, especially multi-tiered systems of support. So with that, I'm in California. San Diego is where I live. And I am with the West region, and my lovely Nora Trinacosta is our director. So I'm going to kick it over to Miss Desiree.
Thanks, Corey. And hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're really excited to kick this day off with everybody. So I am in Arizona, and so I work with our partners here in Arizona, as well as in Southern California, with the exception of San Diego, since that's who Corey works with, and also Nevada and good old New Mexico. So I've been with Texthelp about 3.5 years, and prior to my life here at Texthelp, I was an elementary classroom teacher, and I've also worked in and with educational technology for about 15 years already. So just really passionate about making sure that students have what they need to be successful in the classroom. And so hence why I'm so proud to be a part of Texthelp and support our mission in that. I'm going to kick it over to Nora, just because I see her next on the screen.
Thanks, Desiree. I'm Nora Trinacosta. I'm the Regional Accounts Director for the Western States with Texthelp. Just finished my 10th year with the company. I have a quirky background in teaching ESL overseas. I worked for publishers for, 15 years. And then I married into a neurodiverse family and realized that much of what the publishers was pushing out was not going to work for half the kids or a large percentage of the kids. So that makes me really happy to be at Texthelp. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience and a few new faces in the audience. So we're really pleased to have you today and to, kind of dig into some of the more of the, kind of collegial talk that we don't always get to have. So welcome, everyone. Leah, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nora. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Leah Zogby. I am one of the customer account executives for the West region, although I do live in Boston, Massachusetts. So most of my team is out on the West Coast, but I'm over on the East Coast. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be here. My role is really to support you in figuring out how you can best support your students. I do have experience as a high school teacher teaching biology and chemistry. That's really what my training and what my degree is in the sciences. So really excited for our sessions today. I think you'll learn a lot. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Leah. Awesome. And so the other two on the screen, Kyle Krause and Tina Shea Blanchett, will be your facilitators for both your sessions today. Kyle's going to be walking through the literacy piece, and then Tina Shea will be walking through our math piece.
Corey, do you just want to do a bit of housekeeping to make sure everyone knows how to use Google Meet and how to use it and all that good stuff?
Yeah. Do you want to go ahead and push that?
Sure, I can. And I think if anyone's not familiar with Google Meet, it's pretty simple. There's in the bottom right corner, you'll see the second from the left there, that's a chat box. So if you've got questions at any point, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or on the bottom also, there's kind of a hand that looks like this. If you want to raise your hand, you can do that too. And then obviously on the left, a mic and camera buttons. So if you need to, if you wanted to mute yourself or shut your camera off, you're welcome to do that too. Any questions about Google Meet? I think everyone's usually pretty familiar, but just wanted to make sure.
I would also just add, Desiree, for everyone, there's an option to turn on closed captions, the 3 vertical dots in the middle there. There's an option to turn those on if that's a preference for you.
Oh, thank you, Leah. I turned them on for me, but I forget that nobody can see mine. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you for saying that. I thought it was going the whole time. So Lovely. All right, everyone. So just today's agenda, just a really quick overview. We have the welcome. We're going to get into our book talk. Then we'll have a little bit of a break. We'll go into the literacy tools, and then we'll go into the math tools session. We'll have another little break, and then we're going to come back for a customer testimonial from West Contra with Marianne and Sandy, who are on the call right now. And then I'm going to kick it over to Nora with questions and action steps. So that's our day. And with that, just a couple firm goals. Part of Universal Design for Learning is having firm goals with flexible means to get there. And so some of our firm goals today will be now know UDL and MTSS vocabulary and explain how they relate to learner success. So proactive, responsive, barriers, what are barriers, variability, expert learners, tier 1, those types of things will be, we're hoping that you come away with clear thoughts of what those are. Understand the intersection between UDL and MTSS and be able to explain it by the end of the day. And then know which digital tools support access to content for specific learner needs and share with the group. So we're hoping to get all that in. We have a very short time at the end. So, we're hoping that we can get through this. If we don't check in on all of these, we definitely want to check in on a couple of those at the end of the day. And then just some norms for today as well. We do have a small group. And so what we really want to make sure is that, you show up with an open mind, be ready to engage in the activities of the day. Everyone contributes and is actively participating 100% of the time. Share helpful strategies and resources with collective drive to improve. Be solution-oriented, be kind, helpful, and specific. And then most of all, have fun with us because we are a fun bunch for sure. All right. With that, we have a partnership, a collaborative with California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. I'm going to be sharing a website with you. These are all links, so definitely you can go on and explore after. We did a YUDL series where we participated in getting experts from different areas of education. UDL and MTSS is one of those. We also have UDL and ELL, UDL and social emotional learning, among others. And today we're going to start this session with the UDL and MTSS video. This is just part 1, and I'll share the screen when we get there. This is what these are all different areas of YUDL. We're going to specifically do the UDL and California MTSS. We're going to, again, watch part 1, but there are 3 parts to this series. So definitely go back in and watch those if you would have the time. Okay, and with that, we're going to start the video. It's about 6 minutes, so not too long.
Hello, my name is James McKenna, and I'm an Assistant Director with the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence.
Hello, my name is Rhonda Marriott Spencer, and I am an administrator with the Orange County Department of Education and also part of the California MTSS Executive Leadership Team, supporting the spread and scale of a multi-tiered system of support throughout the state of California.
So for those who are new to UDL, can you please give us a brief description of what it is and why it's important?
I think for me, the best way to describe it is that Universal Design for Learning is proactive. We are providing those supports, giving students what they need when they need it, and it's intentional. It's that intentional design so that we are removing those barriers to accessing the curriculum, to accessing the activities, to support their overall engagement. I always reflect on my experiences with the great Katie Novak around Universal Design for Learning, and she sums it up just beautifully, is that variability is the rule, not the exception. So we know that all students come in, and adults come into the school system with different entry points, right? They have different foundational experiences, they have different perspectives, they have different cultural identities, and so we need to intentionally design our our lessons and our supports with that in mind, that variability is the rule. And then also firm goals and flexible means, right? So here are the standards, here's our overall goal. However, the pathways that our students can access and achieve those goals can be different, and that is okay, because when we intentionally remove those barriers, all of our students can succeed. UDL is so important for the success of our students because we truly need to think about empowering them as learners, putting the learning in their hands, and then also empowering our educators to be able to remove those barriers for students. So as an educator, we can reflect on what barriers, as I am presenting information or designing these learning experiences, what are these barriers that students are going to come up against in order for them to access the content or the project or the activity? So as we do that, this just builds the capacity of the entire system. So as educators are building their capacity with this, then the administrator is really understanding what to look for as they walk into a classroom that is intentionally designed, that is removing barriers, that is engaging students, presenting content in meaningful ways, and then providing those opportunities for students to demonstrate their understanding or connections to the content. So it just empowers the entire system and will lead, again, to that future success of our students.
So you mentioned barriers and needing flexible paths to deal with barriers. Could you give us an example of what it looks like in a classroom for a child to encounter a barrier and what support they might need?
Yes, when we think about barriers, that's not always something in our terminology as educators. And so, I just think about, okay, I would like my students to read this grade level text in a specific content area. However, I have a child that is not reading at that 4th grade level, they're reading at a 1st grade level. So that is an intentional barrier that is put in place, so that student cannot access that content. So, as we think about providing those flexible means, well, I can offer that a different level of text so that student can access the content. And then I can also, maybe could I provide that student with a partner, a learning buddy, to actually engage in the content. So that's my goal is still to access that grade level content. However, I'm providing flexibility that student can work with a partner. So that, again, that is also removing that barrier, which leads to that underlying idea of variability is the rule, not the exception, right? Our students come into our learning environments at different places, and so we need to meet them where they are and then remove those barriers to support them.
What really came across clearly to me is that when we talk about barriers, you're talking about barriers that are in the learning design, in the environment. It's not about trying to figure out what's not working in James. It's about what's not working for James and how we could ally with them and help them get where we all want to go.
Absolutely. And so that's where that word intentionality comes in, right? So I'm very intentional about what is going to support the student and how can I design this learning environment so they can be successful. So then that puts the ownership on that educator to be in that proactive stance, that we're not responding, we are actually being proactive to be able to support them.
All right. So that leads us into our book talk. Before we get into that, is there anything that resonated with you in that video? You can either type it in the chat or you can just take yourself off mute and just give us a little insight on if you heard anything that really kind of resonated with you.
Hi, Cherie here.
Cherie.
German Shepherd's up there. Actually everything, but I really do appreciate the proactive approach and the intentionality of it. and really considering what are the barriers. To me, that is my first question, you know, along with the goals. Like, what are my goals? What are my barriers? And then I can plan very intentionally for the students that I'm supporting. And that's kind of how I approach UDL. It's actually been, I want to say, life-changing, you know, to my practice over the years.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, the barriers. I think I love what James said about it's not about what's in James, it's about what's, you know, around James and the environment and those types of things. So I think that was really important to know. So I love that you talk about that. Marianne says variability is the norm. Absolutely. We have to get into that mindset and go away from the everybody learns the same mentality, right? And then Yvette said focusing on what isn't working for the student and then adjusting the instruction to meet their needs. And then Marianne also said the focus on what is not working for the child instead of not working in the child. Right. Absolutely. Thank you, Marianne and Yvette, for that. All right, and Cherie, thank you so much. All right, so now we're going to be walking or going into our book talk. There is a link that Nora dropped in the chat. That's what we're going to be working off of. This is a very interactive resource link for you. We would hope that you're inputting your responses in there and kind of taking a lot away from what we're doing today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with that, so that we all have it. It is a template, so you can just click on use template and then it'll drop it in your drive for you. And we do have a glossary here, but we're going to skip right down to the questions, discussion questions. And whether you've read the book or read chapter 3 or not, or just perused over it, I think this can either be kind of a review for you or maybe a preview for the text later if you want to read it. And you will be all getting the book. In case you haven't gotten the book yet, you will be getting the book in the mail if you're late in registering. So with that, Miss Desiree, will you want to take question 1? Or
yeah, I would love to. Thank you. And Nora, will you pop the link to chapter 3 in the chat? I think it's coming, Malika. Yeah. So yeah, first question here. And I love this because it's like Corey said, he didn't even necessarily have to read chapter 3 to be able to think about this and answer this. So if you just think about, all of the teachers and coaches and bosses you've had in your life, and think about which one is the most memorable and reflect on how that person was able to engage you. So what were some of the strategies they utilized? And then bonus points, of course, if you can connect those back to the core strategy and back to the core components of UDL. So if anyone feels like they want to either shout it out or pop it in the chat, either way is fine with us.
maybe we'll give like a minute of think time.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And I see there's links coming through now in the chat as well.
Okay, I'll set my timer.
How long did you set your timer for, Corey? You set a timer, but I don't know for how long.
I set it for a minute, but it took me a minute to get to that minute.
Okay, got it.
We have 15 seconds left.
Okay.
You know what I wonder too is if we should review what the core components of UDL are.
Yeah, that's a helpful strategy.
There it is. So UDL guidelines, right? The core components, those multiple means of engagement, what the why of learning. It's recruiting interest and to sustain effort and persistence, self-regulation. How are they engaging themselves? We want multiple means of those, multiple means of representation, the what of learning. How are they, how is the content being given to them? How are they able to, digest the information and learn from what they're doing? So it could be, we're talking about multiple means of accessing content, multiple means of the environment. How is someone understanding that information? And then multiple means of action and expression, the how of learning. How are they showing us what they know? It's not just one design choice, it's multiple. How can they give us the information in the best way that that works for them individually? So those are some of the components of UDL. And it's all about really choice, voice and choice. We hear that all the time. So that's a big part of it. So Desiree, do you want to reread the question and see if...
Sure. Oh, and I see Cindy's sharing something. She says, I had an amazing teacher in high school who would let us sit around in a circle and just discuss and debate the content before doing anything. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So yeah, it's just what we're doing is just thinking about any teachers, coaches, bosses you might have had in your life and which one is most memorable and why. What did they do to engage you?
And Yvette's observation about many of us probably come from an era where there weren't any adjustments made for us. You could either sit and receive what was being given or that was it, right?
Yeah, my science high school teacher also provided time for discussion. The lectures were always interesting, but we had choice about designing our research experiments, and it's a class that I still remember the things that I learned in that class.
I was just thinking about, I've got a son who's in fourth grade, and I look back to when I was in fourth grade, and it was we'd have an assignment to do a research project and make a poster, and that was that. And that's how you had to present to the class. And he came home with an assignment where he could do either that or he could do a recorded presentation instead of having to do it in front of the class, or he could make a diorama or any plethora of things. So there was a lot of different options that he had in order to show what he had learned about the particular topic. So I thought that was really just a really great thing, because not all kids are great at getting up and standing in front of a class and presenting.
Yeah, for sure, Desiree.
I see John. My favorite teacher was my math teacher. He would play games that would allow for us to move around the classroom. The games were usually competitive, and that really encouraged me to want to pay attention and focus on the material so I could win. Yeah, I love that.
I agree. I think anything that is game-based brings such a different element to learning and such a cool element to learning. And I think of my 8th grade math teacher where before 8th grade, every class setup was rows or lines of desks, and we would listen and we would practice on our own. We would have to raise our hand to ask questions. But then in 8th grade, I noticed that the whole setup of the room was different. We were all in little groups of 4 or 5, and our teacher would lecture maybe, 10, maybe 15 minutes on a new concept. And then the rest of the class was small groups at those tables that we would work together. And I have so many more memories of that class than any other class where we were in rows or in lines, because it was just so much more engaging.
Something funny about that, though, I remember back to my teaching days and having the kids sitting in groups until their behavior interfered. And then
well, it is a give and take.
Right.
I like to think I was a perfect student and didn't cause any problems, but maybe I have selective memory.
I think there's another, yes, Sherry, I enjoyed classes that allowed choice and how I engaged in the content. I loved small group discussions instead of whole group. Yeah, I think that can be a lot less intimidating too for students to be more interactive and engaged in a small group.
I just want to say something about getting feedback along the way and open to discussion. So I think when like someone respecting your work and telling you and giving you feedback and checking in along the way is very successful for me. And feeling like feeling like your thought process is respected.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that one, Sandy, too, right? Respecting respecting our students and letting them know we respect what they're thinking and saying is important.
Malika, I saw you raised your hand.
Oh, I was trying to just clap like to amplify that comment. I'm still learning Google Meet. Sorry.
Our team loves all the little icon responses, so that's fun.
I had shared a kind of a bittersweet memory of a really wonderful teacher in my early education. So I had a teacher who ran a pull-out project-based learning program. We were actually bused once a week to a site, the quote, gifted kids, which is not something I really like the idea of. But as an adult, I'm thinking, well, why in the world did we bus like a small percentage of students someplace to do all this really great stuff and nobody else got to do it? But we did project-based learning. It was, there was a lot there to drive our interest. But what really, I think, made it super meaningful is that there was a lot of peer accountability. We did a lot of collaboration, and there was flexible grouping that was really drawn together by the students. You know, we would be given some kind of a project, like, you know, create a currency and, you know, share it, or we'd have to make a movie or something like that. And the students sort of figured out which tasks would meet the you know, the talents and the desires of specific students in the group. So we're kind of building in our own choice, right? That peer accountability was a really huge part of that, and something that that came out of that was like a really wonderful sense of community. I'm still friends with people 40 years later, you know, that I was in those classes with. So I think it was a real aha moment for me that we were doing this with some kids, right, and not all, but also just that when done correctly, that kind of interaction really builds community for the students.
Love that, Nora. For sure. All right. So with that, thank you, Desi, for leading that question. Nora, do you want to go on to the next question?
Absolutely. So, although UDI and differentiated instruction share some similarities, there are differences between the two frameworks. So imagine somebody saying, well, those sound the same to me. How are they different? So what would be your answer? And let's take a minute here to just think. I'll let folks kind of think here for a minute. But feel free to chime in, you know, vocally or in the chat.
I'll take a stab at this just because I've never really thought about it this way, but I think like UDL is all the time. It's your environment. So it's providing that access kind of as it's always there. And then when you're differentiating your instruction, you would more likely know the student's needs. So it's more targeted, right? So within that accessible environment, you might need to do more. So I don't know if I'm right there, but that's my kind of take on it. So you.
And thinking about that in terms of MTSS, would you say that there was like maybe a tier 1 and then a tier 2?
Well, yeah, I mean, because I skimmed the chapter, I mean, tier 1 would be the omnipresent learning environment, right? So that everyone has these tools, and then as you get, I work in special education, so when we look at that tier 3, like the tier 3 is students with really unique, unusual needs where you have to do things that are above and beyond, you know, where, you know, low, mid, high, right? So if you think of that low, mid, high tech or things like that. So
yeah, I like that. I like that. Malika.
I really meant it this time. Hi, thanks. I would say the same. And then differentiated instruction, it seems to be more kind of led by the teacher, you know, propelled by the teacher, whereas UDL, you know, students may choose to access an audio text one day and may choose to read, the next day. It just provides options for students to choose what works for them in that moment for that activity at that time, rather than something being predetermined by the teacher.
Yeah, I like that. It's definitely, I think, learner variability sometimes gets looked at as, okay, this group of kids, but learner variability within the same learner is a really key part of UDL, right? And that's certainly true for lots of us. And I think more true than ever post-COVID. Students that pre-COVID might have been just fine, independently cruising along, may need a lot more of those kind of choices than they did in the past.
For sure.
Yeah, let's see. John says UDL is a framework that focuses on designing instruction and materials that are accessible to all students regardless of ability or disability. Differentiated instruction, on the other hand, is an approach that tailors teaching methods and materials to meet the individual needs of each student based on their abilities, interests, and learning styles.
Love it.
Okay, so interesting. All right.
And, I think a lot of what everyone is saying is, works into those vocabulary words that we were wanting to get, really comfortable with. UDL is absolutely a tier 1 support, right? It's going to help 80 to 90% of those students. And we are being proactive about designing the environment. And so to meet all students' needs. So that's where the choice comes in. And then you're right. Differentiated instruction is that responsive space where you've already done that UDL, you've already provided it a lot of choice, then you're coming back and again, Malika, you're again, absolutely right. It's more student-centered with UDL, creating choice for students. And then on the back end, the responsive is, okay, well that, this didn't support these students. And so then the teacher has to come in and say, okay, well, how can I differentiate their instruction to meet their needs? So love it, love it.
So Corey, you're basically saying that UDL is proactive.
Yep.
And differentiated instruction is responsive.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. And in the book as well, Katie Novak gets away from saying reactive. So, it used to be proactive and reactive, and sometimes reactive sounds like a negative word. And so calling it out as responsive just means we're responding to what we've already done, and we're supporting the student in that way.
Like that. I see lots of old friends on our session today and some new friends. So some of you might have heard this analogy from me before, but for many years, when we talked about the read and write toolbar, we would say that it was like a Swiss Army knife, and it had everything that students needed to, to do what they needed to do. And it was up to the students to choose, the supports that they required. But I think we need to take that a step farther when we're thinking about really building that. Instead of giving the students a Swiss Army knife with lots and lots of stuff on it and say, knock yourself out, what we need to do is give them a chef's knife and train them to be Unchopped Junior, right? We need to give them, yes, the tool, but not just sort of like, okay, here's this endless plethora of things that you need to do. Instead, it's like, that tool, but the support to use it wisely, right?
Love it.
Okay. I love this. Great discussion. All right, Corey, so we go on to our next question here.
Sure, absolutely. I think we understand, that not all of you are going to be inside the classroom. But so with this next question, it's either you or what you've seen in your districts, I think would be, whatever you've seen lately. How do you currently use grouping and regrouping in your classroom to ensure that all students have access to both UDL and targeted instruction? And I think about, back in my classrooms when I was doing the project-based learning and blended learning model, it was about station rotations, but also, differentiating the station rotations to meet all the needs. So there was a lot of groupings that, had to involve some targeted instruction as well. So we'll give you a minute to think about that. Again, what you either do yourself or what you have seen with your classrooms would be great. How do you currently use grouping and regrouping in your classrooms to ensure that all students have access to both UDL and targeted instruction. And I would take this a step further, because if it's not currently happening in your schools or districts, the UDL piece, how would you like to see it? Okay, any thoughts? I see Marianne went off mute, so I'm hoping she probably has a lot of great insight. She is an ELL coordinator at West Contra, so I'd love to hear your thoughts, Marianne.
Yeah. What I've seen is teachers, not everybody, but some teachers group and regroup daily for ELD or regularly, and they adjust the groups as the students move in the proficiency. As far as using UDL, I think our district has a long way to go because there is a mentality that by using, for instance, the read and write tools, you're making it too easy for kids, no? That they're like cheating, and Sandy and I have had this conversation. And so that's, we'll get into that later on in the day, but that was just my piece. And there are schools where teachers actually co-teach, so they some teachers teach all the language arts and other ones teach the math, but I worry that there is not enough of this inclusive way of teaching and adaptive that is UDL. So
I love that, Marianne. I love that you said the inclusive part, right? Because that's really our mission, is inclusive education and inclusive practices. And UDL is a very inclusive practices framework for sure. Yvette said, I love the way one teacher created math masters in our class that would take groups of students to help them master the skill in a competition format. So fun. The math masters changed all the time, so all students had a chance to be a master. Love that, Yvette.
mm-hmm.
Rosie says our teachers use station rotation, and one of the stations is a small group with teacher. Love that as well. Go ahead, Sandy.
I think that I don't know, I see this more in elementary school than secondary in my district. So that's one thing. And I also see it more more grouping and regrouping in classes where there's student with special needs and paraprofessionals. So it's also a manpower thing. But just for me, it's a struggle with a high school teacher that doesn't understand that you can work with small groups and have students. It's just not a mentality always of the secondary instructional setting. And it could be, especially at schools with blocks where they have a big time block. So yeah, our district has a lot to learn still, as I'm sure a lot of large districts do.
Absolutely. You know, what's interesting about that is that as well is, you're so right. Those multiple means of getting, information to students tends to die off as the students get older, because again, we see that in higher ed as well, right? Where we're not doing as much grouping, we're not doing as much hands-on, those types of things. It's sit and get a lot of times. Any other thoughts with this one?
Yeah, I want to do a shout out, because I always have to keep it as a baseline. The teachers at Richmond High School and Helms Middle School that work in the Internationals Network with newcomers, they do a lot of small group and differentiated instruction. No?
Yeah, love that. And does that go along with the integrated and designated ELD time?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And it's it's a program for newcomers that have been in the US for 1 or 2 years, no, at the secondary level.
Okay, great. Well, that is wonderful. I'm actually going to send it over to Miss Leah now. I'll go to the slide deck, but Leah, if you want to run the next section or the next portion of this.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to pivot a little bit. And Corey, I believe slide 8 is where you'll want to be.
Okay.
And so given that we focused really on chapter 3, there's obviously so much great content in the entire book, but I wanted to pull out a couple standout excerpts from chapter 3. So I would encourage everyone to kind of put in the chat. It doesn't have to be word for word or, a full copy and paste, but any big themes that you noticed in chapter 3 that you wanted to share, because these were kind of the two that stuck out to me. So on page 55, Katie Novak says, as a result, there's no mention of RTI in the law. Instead, the law calls for multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, defined as a comprehensive continuum of evidence-based systemic practices to support a rapid response to students' needs, with regular observation to facilitate data-based instructional decision-making. So it's a long sentence, but essentially what I like to pull away from this as a person who is trained in science, and I have a very scientific-oriented brain, to hear things like evidence-based and data-based is super important to me, because we live in a world where data kind of runs or should run the decisions that we're making, and it shouldn't apply any differently to our students. And then a second excerpt that really stood out to me on page 59 was, too many organizations hold rigorous, engaging instruction as a carrot. Access to these courses is transactional, as in you can access these opportunities if you perform above grade level, if you speak English, if you behave this way, or if you have this skill. It needs to be said, teaching and learning are not transactional. And I thought that was super powerful and very to the point, because when I was in elementary, middle, high school, not too long ago, this is the language that was spoken, right? You can take this AP course if you've done this. You can enroll in this special class if you have this skill, if you have this grade. And so I think it's really pointed to say that teaching and learning are not transactional. We're talking about kids and students who are still growing and becoming the person that they are. And so they're not really able to give something and take something in return. And so it's on the adults within that system to make sure that those opportunities are presented equally to all learners, regardless of what they have or haven't done at that point. So kind of two different excerpts here. One is very data-based and one's a little bit more big picture, but I thought they kind of tied in really well to the world we're living in now and the changes that we want to make in our classrooms. So again, I invite anyone to throw in the chat pieces of chapter 3, or maybe even pieces of other chapters that stood out to you. And we can take maybe a minute or so, Corey, if you think that works, to kind of think and see what people come up with.
Perfect. I think you can, if you didn't get a chance, if you did register a little late and you didn't get a chance, I think even commenting on these two excerpts from Leah work as well.
Hi, this is Yvette. I was just thinking, I was looking at the part when it's talking about how important it is for students to access grade level material regardless of where they are. That really stands out, and just finding ways for that to happen, because they still need to learn the material. Just because they may not be able to access it independently doesn't mean that they don't have the ability to process that information.
I agree, Yvette. That can't be said loud or clearly enough, right?
Yeah, and it just brings me back to that when my last years in teaching, and I would like, definitely UDL wasn't all we did, but a lot of us did the DI stuff. And so I was creating so much material to work for each of these students, and it was just so much work. And if I would have understood that a little bit more, that grade level text, especially with ELs, and you can totally relate to this, I'm sure, Marianne, what they can understand at certain levels, it would be like you're trying to find enough materials to help support your EL students, but then, a lot of it may look babyish and all these other things, and you're not accessing their proficiency in their primary language might be different than what will be different than their proficiency in the English language, and that doesn't equate all the time. And so having them be able to learn at grade level is super important.
I like this sentence I'm looking at the book, page 61. Creating inclusive systems and de-leveling will not work if critical drivers are not in place. So there's a lot of training that needs to happen so that resources are really, I don't know, just that whole UDL. If it's not already happening, then the whole grouping and small groups or whatever, you're taking it at a different level. Like that should already be the norm, and it's not in most classrooms.
Love that, Sandy. Cynthia says, sorry, Leah, I'm kind of taking yours over.
No, don't worry, Corey. You're doing great. Keep going.
Cynthia said, I like the MTSS excerpt where it mentions rapid response. I think that should be emphasized. Students change quickly and we need to be responsive to them. Absolutely. I dropped one in the link or in the chat as well. It's on page 48. If we want our students to be motivated, self-directed learners, we have to support their journey so they become autonomous and can personalize their learning. And this goes back specifically to that expert learning and universal design for learning. Expert learners doesn't mean they're experts at learning necessarily. What it means is they can find the resources they personally need to be successful in their learning. And I think that that's really important. So Cherie says, I love that piece about teaching and learning are not transactional from the perspective of supporting inclusive practices. That speaks to the assumption of having to be a good fit for a class as opposed to making the learning environment a fit for all students. Love that, Cherie.
I like this here. It's on page 50 where it talks about, it's kind of at the top, in our classroom and learning environments, we have to proactively design our instruction so all learners have options and choices to self-differentiate their learning. And I really like that, giving them the opportunity to, and like I put in the chat, really empower them to be able to self-differentiate.
What page is that on? 50?
50. Mm-hmm.
I also noticed from this page 59 excerpt, right? You can have access to these opportunities if you blah, 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 behave. And we know that behavior is so closely tied to things like avoidance, frustration, and instead of using behavior as a threshold, we can kind of look at behavior as an indicator of, is this student being challenged or not? Is this student being overly challenged? Is this the appropriate environment? And kind of if we just shift our mindset a little bit about that from a behavior perspective, I think that's a big piece that I think, is missing in schools, and definitely something I noticed is missing in schools when I was in the classroom.
Love that you called that out, Leah. Absolutely. Marianne says student agency is critical for EL multilingual students. Language should not be a barrier. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think EL students are some of the most impressive students to watch learn, because I cannot speak two languages. I don't know if I ever will be able to. And to see, I had probably about 50% EL students when I was teaching. To see students just in real time translate for their classmates, translate the materials they have, it's really incredible. But the reality is they're kind of held back. So when I was teaching biology, I noticed a lot of students would be able to pick up on Latin-based words quicker because they were very similar to their native language. So they would really excel in biology, but in their literature classes, their ELA classes, it was a little bit harder. So just kind of looking at things with the big picture, we know these students are incredibly well-versed, and they have so much potential, and to kind of make sure we're fitting their needs and their abilities and their strengths.
Beautiful.
So I think we're pretty much right almost up to our break time. If anyone wants to take the last few minutes, maybe to throw in the chat any last ideas they have about the book and these chapters. Unless Corey, Desiree, Nora, you think it's a good time to maybe kick off our break?
I think we can break now.
All right, we'll give you a couple extra minutes. Yeah, and we'll see you back at 9:45 Pacific time. 1:45. All right. If you would like, if you can, you don't need to leave the meeting. If you can just mute and take yourself off screen, that would be great. See you back at 9:45. Thank you for the amazing discussion, by the way. You all had I loved our discussions around the book.